Beginning from today and for the next months until June 2021, we are hosting 5 academic experts from South Korea, the United Arab Emirates, Zimbabwe, Brazil, and Turkey, who are going to explain and analyze the processes of nation building in the countries of their expertise. Our first meeting is about nation building in North Korea from the establishment of the DPRK until today. We have the pleasure and the honor to host Dr. Sουνκιούνγκ Τσόι, research professor at the University of North Korean Studies in Seoul, live. She is with us, and I welcome her. We are very happy to host you, Dr. Tsoi. Before we begin with the lecture and the discussion which follows, I would like to give the floor for a short note to Professor Avi Bar-Eli, the head of our team here on Ben-Gurion Political Thought and senior fellow at the Ben-Gurion Institute for the Study of Israel and Zionism. Professor Bar-Eli, the floor is yours.
Hello all, our guests and our members of the Research Hub. We are delighted to open this series of research lectures on nation buildings in various places of the world. We welcome Dr. Tsoi, and we are looking forward to hear you today and to use your insights and insights from the coming lectures for our own purposes, our own selfish purposes, meaning understanding the process of the Israeli process of nation building. Welcome.
Thank you very much. And I would like to give the floor now to Professor Paula Caballo, the director of the Ben-Gurion Institute for the Study of Israel and Zionism, for her remarks.
Thank you, Gavriel. Can you hear me, all of you?
Yes.
Good. So I'm delighted that we're starting this series. We've been, in fact, dreaming about it, I have to say, for the last 3 years since we started this very special group, the Ben-Gurion Political Thought Research Hub at the Azrieli Center for Israel Studies. We were talking about the importance of exchanging the perspectives on nation building and reaching outside of the crossing, I would say, geopolitical barriers and reaching out of the Israeli demarcation lines of thought and political understanding. It's been clear to us that we really have to share with others our thoughts and questions. So this is a very special moment for us, but it's only the opening accord to what I hope will become a long-lasting collaboration with all the participants of this series, with you, Dr. Tsoi, and with you, Dr. Maroa. I see you're here as well, and with others in this series. And I really hope that this series will become an opening accord to exchange of ideas and perhaps exchange of scholarship and collaboration and joint scholarship between our institutions. So thank you for agreeing to join us in this journey, and we're looking forward to hear all of you.
Thank you very much. So before we start with the lecture, I would like to tell to the audience on Facebook Live who watch us right now that they can write their questions on the chat, and during the discussion that will follow, we are going to discuss their questions as well. So stay with us. Now it's the time for the lecture. Dr. Sουνκιούνγκ Τσόι is a research professor at the Simyeon Institute of the University of North Korean Studies, where she joined after obtaining her PhD in North Korean studies in 2018. She published articles about cross-border connections between North Korea and China and how nation building in North Korea is presented by the media of North Korea. Dr. Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gavriήλ, for introducing me, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I'm Sungkyung Choi, working at the University of North Korean Studies and teaching at the Deokseong Women's University recently. And today I'm going to talk about past and present of North Korea in terms of nation building. So can you see my slides now? Okay. So when you think about North Korea, what comes to your mind? Maybe these images are the stereotypes of what you have heard of and seen through the lens of media and scholarly works as well. So North Korea has been known as an extreme case of isolation and even mystery, and most of the representations of North Korea have largely produced the monolithic idea of totalitarian state and its oppressed people. And in the similar vein, as Hazel Smith pointed out, scholarly analysis also have framed it as mad in the sense of being irrational, and as bad in the sense of the motivation for policy being ascribed to normatively unacceptable characteristics of the state and its leadership. So also dominant approach of media coverage toward North Korea has focused on potential use of military force and nuclear weapons. And this presentation redirects attention to North Korea as it is and argues the importance of questioning the general stereotypes that frame North Korea as hermit kingdom by tracing the trajectory of its nation building. In doing so, I challenge one-dimensional approach as brutal regime and provides an alternative approaches by highlighting North Korea as a nation state. And for this, I will look through the process of nation building in North Korea by 4 keywords here. And I first explore historical backgrounds, including the context of ethnic division in Korea and the formation of Juche ideology, and then examine the current shifts in North Korea, such as official discourse on nation and reunification, and the major changes of socialist construction in the Kim Jong-un era. So historically, Korean nationalism emerged as an ideology of anti-colonial struggle, and this fight against the Japanese Empire in turn reinforced And this fight against the Japanese Empire in turn reinforced Korean nationalism based on a shared belief of ethnic homogeneity and desire for an independent Korean as a nation state. However, national division thwarted this illusion of ethnic unity and created the incongruences in the political and ethnic dimensions of Korean nationhood. So Korea failed to make a sole state in the nation building process,
I'm sorry, Professor, I've just stopped your sharing because there was a technical problem with it. Could you please share again, and we will see maybe if now it will be shown for everyone.
So now you can.
Now, yes. Okay. So yeah, now people are seeing this. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
And the legacies of this anti-colonial nationalism and Cold War ideological confrontation formed 2 critical pillars in nation building of North Korea. And first, anti-Japanese armed struggle led by Kim Il-sung became a valuable political resource in North Korea, and which allowed him to be portrayed as national liberator and hero and permitted him to claim to the legacy of pure ethnic Korean nationalism. The establishment of his Democratic People's Republic of Korea thus has its origins in anti-imperialist struggles, and in time this developed into anti-Americanism as the United States emerged as a new imperialist enemy with the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950. So North Korea has constructed antagonism toward the US as a cornerstone of its state building. And second, North Korea has maintained its legitimacy by competing with South Korea regimes. And the post-1945 division created the problem of who should and would represent Korean nation and who has the political legitimacy. So both Koreas reconstructed peculiar links between ethnicity and the state, and which otherwise would have resulted in a loss of political legitimacy. So the legacies of anti-colonialism and competition over legitimacy based on the belief of homogeneity have entailed inter-ethnic conflicts and the establishment of us versus them mindsets over half a century. And this situation sits in stark contrast to the conventional wisdom that ethnic unity produces peaceful coexistence. So the post-colonial nation building interwoven with the Cold War constituted the national discourse in North Korea, with confrontations between the Korean nation and the enemy of the nation, which is United States. So this is Picasso's masterpiece of Simyeon massacre, and massacre of civilians were committed by the US and South Korean military forces in the period of October to December 1950. So since the liberation of Korea in 1945, North Korea has fought against imperialist forces and regarded America as the first enemy, and the impact of the Korean War were severe at the time, and over 50% of the North Korean cities were destroyed and everyday lives became devastated. And in particular, the chemical warfare conducted by the US Air Forces were enough to leave North Koreans with bitter memory of hatred toward America. And this became a decisive historical moment in creating North Korean nationalism. And furthermore, the North Korean regime has widely distributed propaganda about Simyeon massacre and stimulating people's collective memory of the Korean War and criticizing American imperialist brutality. And this process, the regime has strengthened North Koreans' hostility against the US through education. For example, this is the Simyeon Massacre Museum. Here has been used as an effective site of education to remind North Koreans of the war and American enemy. As you see here, the whole museum represents how US soldiers are cruel, and this shaped the collective memory of the war. And the authorities reported that over 30,000 people were massacred by US forces over 50 days. And this number was exaggerated though, but this is the, this is the one of the examples how regime taught North Koreans. And also the regime has utilized anti-Americanism to block the infiltration of foreign culture and imperialist thoughts, as well as the influx of capitalist elements after the economic crisis in the mid-90s. But the earlier criticism of the United States has decreased in the Kim Jong-un era. And back then, in the Kim Il-sung era, Marxist, Rainism were ruling principles of his early regime. But in the process of power struggle after the death of Stalin, Kim Il-sung presented Juche ideology, and Juche has been developed as a ruling ideology from 1960s onwards, meaning that self-identity and self-reliance. And the idea of Juche in its early days reflected nationalistic response to the imperialism. The focus was enhancing the people's awareness of the need to secure independence from outside forces. And also Kim Il-sung and his followers sought to defend their dictatorship by blocking criticism from both Moscow and Beijing. And thus the Juche ideology was kind of diplomatic strategy to assure its independence between the two communist giants. And Kim Il-sung was invited to the 10th anniversary of the Bandung Conference, and he gave speech at Ali Arham Social Science Institute in 1965, and his speech outlined the basic principles of Juche and making his declaration that DPRK is based on Juche in ideology, independence in politics, and self-reliance in economy, and self-defense in national defense. And on the one hand, Juche ideology paved the road to the foundation to follow the path of independence. And on the other hand, it reinforced the sole leadership of the power monopoly of Kim Il-sung. And let's move on to the official discourse on nation and reunification. And we can see here the notion of nation has been in tandem with the development of the Juche ideology as well. Originally, the nation, 민족 in Korean, the concept originated from Stalin's theory of nation. But however, since 1970s, North Korea started to emphasize the blood relations of the Korean people, effacing the original concept of Stalin's one. And interestingly, when we look through the changes of definition on nation here, since 1973, the dictionary included bloodline as an element that defines nation. And since 1985 here, bloodline has been located on the top of the list, and this definition has been maintained throughout the present. So even today, reunification proposals issued by both Koreas are based on quasi-primordial belief that Korean nation is unitary nation, and that this premise will inevitably lead to national reunification. And in 2018, 3 inter-Korean summits took place within 6 months. And at this particular juncture, ethno-nationalism emerged valuable as a unifying force in both the North and the South. And in fact, the reunification discourse in both in the Panmunjom Declaration and Pyongyang Joint Declaration are based on national reconciliation. And this is part of declarations, and these phrases looks like reunification should be achieved in primordial ways. And as you can see here, the term blood relations and the spirit of the Korean nation here. So, and also the independence of Korean nation was mentioned in both declarations as another principle for reunification. So similarly, Kim Jong-un's Kim Jong-un regime has employed two veins of discourse on nation. One is Kim Il-sung Minjo, which means this notion cements the boundary between independent nation in the north and semi-colonial nation in the south, and which was emerged from the mid-90s with the death of Kim Il-sung. And Joseonmin족 is emphasizing the homogeneity of the two Koreas. And while Joseonmin족, the Korean nation, refers to the unitary nation of the identical bloodline, language, and culture. But the term Kim Il-sung Min족, Kim Il-sung nation, identifies Kim Il-sung as the father of the nation. So which reveals that the independence from the imperialist power. And so, yeah. So ethnic nation or independent state or both, and that's the problem and that's the matter. And what is North Korea pursuing today? And what is the blueprint of the country now? So North Korea is changing now, and we can discuss the changes in Kim Jong-un era by comparing with the previous regime here. And North Korea's monolithic idea of Suryong system is continued in Kim Jong-un era. However, significant changes are captured in Kim Jong-un era, and the regime keeps on promoting socialist construction for nation state building. And Father Kim's guiding strategy was military first and powerful and prosperous state. And son Kim's one is 사회주의 문명국, which means civilized and powerful state. And for both regimes, improvement of people's livelihood and economic development have been very crucial for socialist construction. Here, Kim Jong-il prioritized the People's Army and granting it the highest economic and resource allocation priority, and more importantly, a military first policy aimed at building a powerful and prosperous state based on military strength. And this idea for enhancing the benefits of the people is further elaborated in pursuit with socialist civilization in the Kim Jong-un era. And people first and our state first were advocated in series instead of our nation first, which was implemented in the 90s to recreate tradition for the legitimacy of the regime. So in Kim Jong-il era, the military first was proposed as a ruling strategy to build a powerful and prosperous state, and which means a unique style. The military first means the unique style of politics aimed at undertaking a revolution and construction based on the army's strength. And in this process, the revolutionary soldier spirit was further stressed as a driving force for socialist construction in order to build a powerful state. And Kim Jong-il implemented Gangsong-daeguk in 1998, and this phrase signifies the intention to transform North Korea into a powerful state. And this ruling discourse emerged in response to double-headed crisis over the collapse of the socialist blocs, the severe food crisis in the mid-90s, and the death of Kim Il-sung. So therefore, the military first and the Gangsong-daeguk and Seongun and Gangsong-daeguk were developed to overcome these crises that North Korea was faced with at the time. And powerful state resonated in Kim Jong-un era, but the discourse is represented in different ways. And building a civilized socialist power in Kim Jong-un era means a country where socialist culture develops in a comprehensive way and where the people possess a high level of creativity and culture. And to make this happen, it is important to make all the people powerful builders of socialism and who have a wealth of knowledge and high cultural attainments and provide them with proper conditions and environment. So the regime explains that civilized way of lifestyle is new era's demands and mentioning that they would no longer need to tighten their belts and the regime will make people enjoy socialist prosperity. And overall, in the Kim Jong-un era, the economic development and improvement of people's livelihood are emphasized rather than military forces, and that is the discourse of building a civilized socialist power is deeply related with the improvement people's living standard based on light industry, pursuit of global trend, and leaders' pro-people gesture, and which is encapsulated as the people first principle. And also many construction projects in Pyongyang, such as apartment buildings, cultural and leisure facilities are found with the modifier like monumental creations and symbols of civilization. And interestingly, so-called socialist civilization pursue the ideas of world-class and global trend. And for instance, when the Simyeon ski resort here was completed in 2013, it was admired as a world first class resort and in the country's news broadcasts. And North Korea's orientation toward the ideas of globally developed and world-class can be explained through the socialist construction for their people. And these changes from military first to people first reveals a change of ruling strategy, which reflects the people's needs from the bottom. And Kim Jong-un's new strategy is for satisfying the country's growing middle class, as well as the young generation who are engaging in the progression of marketization, the inflow of foreign media, and the border crossing to China as well. So that is Kim Jong-un regime emphasizes people-centered policy and their economic improvement in order to meet people's needs and values from the bottom. And this changing social reality made crucial impact on North Korean state building today. And Kim Jong-un's political power base has been established on the basis of voluntary agreement and mobilization from the public. And at the same time, North Korea attempts to redefine itself as a state, asserting our state first. And in early 2019, in January of the same year, 노동신문, the official newspaper, posted the score and lyrics of a song, Our Flag. And in April of the same year, our national flag was performed in their People's Assembly. And this reappearance of state and our state first reflects the regime's desire to be a normal country. Then how are the civilized way of life and the pursuit of normalization of the country represented? Recently, North Korean regime engenders more connectedness with the outside world, creating new images as a normal country. And Kim regime is actively using the social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram, targeting audiences outside of the country. And in Kim Jong-un era, many official social media accounts were opened, and DPRK today here is one of them. And we can do likes and leave comments and get back reply on the comments if lucky. And overall, the representations rely on images rather than text, and which means these international platforms target audiences outside of the country. And North Korea's imaginary toward the civilized and strong socialist state carries the visions of beauty and prosperity, and the posts on the social media display modern and splendid bases of both culture and leisure. And for example, the ski leisure and ice links represent socialist cultural lives filled with beautiful and healthy living spirit in the most civilized conditions and environment, according to Rodong-Sinmun, which is official newspaper. And also, newly innovated orchestra theater and night view of the Scientist Street feature the idea scenes of socialist power appealing to a distant public. And some of the posts on the DPRK today employ the discourse of socialist paradise and stressing the country's people-centered socialism and showing the happiness and prosperity of the people. And in addition, it uploads images of everyday lives and sports events and visitors from abroad, and which are there to remind audiences of the fact that ordinary lives are ongoing here as well. And in the country that has often been referred as closed or isolated. And to sum up the stories, while Kim Jong-il regime employed top-down strategy that benefits to people from above under the military-first policy, but the Kim Jong-un regime now has employed people-first policy that embraces masses, which produces bottom-up integration. And while Kim Jong-il's powerful state based on military first reflects the self-protectiveness to overcome the crisis, but Kim Jong-un's vision of powerful state based on the people first and its representation clearly reveals the confidence as a socialist state and showing that the country's developed urbanscape and people's happy lives. So the vision of the country not only reflects the changes in the North Korean society, but also the connectedness with the outside world so that people can imagine North Korea as part of the world and as a normal country, but not colonized by it. At the intersection of globalization and socialist construction in the Kim Jong-un era, North Korea reflected the people's needs from the bottom, at the same time reshaped the idea and images of socialism. And this is the way that North Korea legitimizes its status as normal socialist country and reinforces the identity of North Korean style socialism on the world stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Choi. It has been a very interesting point of view of how North Korea sees itself, and DPRK sees itself, something that it is very important for us to know. It's the first time that I encounter the Juche way of thinking and the Juche ideology in North Korea. Now it's time for the discussion of our first meeting. It is Professor Avi Bar-Eli. You have 5 to 10 minutes more or less, and then we are going to continue with our discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Sung-Kyung Choi, for your illuminating lecture. For us, North Korea is a remote place for us from our point of view. You are at the far east from the point of view of this Middle Eastern state. Maybe better called, we will better see ourselves as Western Asian state. But anyway, it's remote for us and unknown generally. We only know bits and pieces from journalistic descriptions. It's very illuminating. We hope to use insights from your lecture and maybe a discussion from the discussion in order for us to get some insights for our own research concerning Israeli nation building, which is the top. That's why we invited you from our point of view, from our research interests. Now, if I understand you correctly, Dr. Choi, you addressed the concept of nation building from a particular broad but particular perspective of a conception of collective identity, the conception of the communist Korea's conception of collective identity. And if I understand you correctly, at least up until nowadays in North Korea, the basic nature of this conception of collective identity is a conflictual one, meaning that you are the North Korean regime offered its citizens a point of view of a conflict, a constant conflict, beginning with the conflict with Japan as early as 1910, then from 1945 the conflict with the USA as major adversaries that defined the collective identity of North Korea along the lines of legacy of anti-colonialism, firstly the Japanese one and then the American one. Now this antagonistic worldview, I would say, is typical to communist regimes generally, but also to fascist regimes, like the regimes in Italy, Germany, and Spain. This self-identification via antagonistic relations with some foreign power, some neighbor or foreign power, superpower in the North Korean case vis-a-vis the USA. Now, this common base of communism and fascism is a striking similarity. One of the striking similarities between those two seemingly opposing regimes, and I would classify, from my point of view, the North Korean regime as a fascist regime, no less than a communist regime, I would say, and the difference is blurring here. But communist regimes have had some positive vision. Now, what is the positive vision of this communist regime of North Korea? You use the term socialist prosperity. Now, if we think about this concept and remember the famine during the mid 90s, the horrible, you called it economic crisis. It was a calamity, no less than a calamity mass destruction of this society. So and in this context, you haven't addressed the continuing political mass persecution in North Korea, including the concentration camps, mass killings, and you know better than me, more than me, about all those horrible political atrocities. What are the ramifications of this persecution, continued persecution, on North Koreans' nation building? Or if we narrow ourselves to the conception of collective identity, has it nothing to do with it? Now, it seems to me that you offer the positive vision that you offer for understanding the construction of collective identity in North Korea is you call it a sense of a conception of pure ethnic nationalism. But it is not always the case that the cornerstone of ethnic nationalism is so conflictual. Now, it seems that this ethnic nationalism, the North Korean ethnic or communist Korean North ethnic nationalism, is all about war. Is all about war. The main theme of this ethnic nationalism is a violent conflict. Violent conflict. But so we are left with some general concept, abstract concept, such as socialist prosperity or socialist civilization, or if we go ahead in time to Kim Jong-un era, the people first concept, but we are left. These are abstract concepts. What are the political, educational, cultural, social horizons, positive horizons of this ethnic nationalism? I think this is my impression, and please consider what I'm saying here as a long question, not more than a long question, because I'm ignorant in the history of North Korea. I know only the very basic facts about it. So all I'm saying is it's something that should be considered as a long question addressed to you. But it seems, I'm saying it as a question, it seems as if the main perspective of this of North Korea's nation building, especially constructing of some collective identity, is a belligerent one. It's a belligerent conception of identity. Always engage in some conflict with some horrible enemy. You use the term us versus them, but more part of the time the them in this phrase are Koreans, are the South Koreans, are part of those them that we defined ourselves as versus them. So this makes someone wonder whether this ethnic nationalism is only a tool in the hands of the regime, because if it's also used as opposing, for some opposition between the North and the South, the main thing here is the belligerent definition and not some mutual nationality. I want to sum up my, I'm concluding, of course. I think from our point of view, the North Korean example is a good sign, is a good exemplification of the fact that genuine democratic nationalism cannot be solely or primarily antagonistic. It must, in its own logic, must be anchored in some positive vision. And our example, that's my final note, Gavriel, our example is striking in this sense, because Jewish nationalism generally is immersed in conflict. From its inception, it is immersed in, you name it, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, of course, the decades after the establishment of the state are immersed in conflict, in a violent conflict, to be correct. And still, and you can also add that the Jews generally, all across their history, were characterized in an antagonistic history. They've had ongoing antagonistic relations with their surroundings. And still, if we are thinking about Jewish nationalism, it's not all about war. You cannot understand it only in terms of our conflict with the Arabs. If you do such, if you are trying to understand it in such a way, such a one-sided way, you will be lost. You won't understand Jewish nationalism if you understand it also in conflictual terms. Now, my concluding question is for you: is it the case with North Korea? Is it true that my impression that North Koreans North Korean collective identity is primarily antagonistic? True. That's my final question for you, Dr. Tsoi, and thank you again for your lecture.
Thank you, Professor Bar-Eli. Dr. Tsoi, with your answers, and then we will start with the discussion. We are all waiting to listen to your views after the discussants. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for your discussion and comments. Yes, I approached North Korea as a nation state and focusing on the concept of collective identity, and particularly I also mentioned that the anti-Japanese struggles and anti-Americanism afterwards, and the legacy of the anti-colonialism are ongoing in North Korea even now, and the rhetorics of the anti-colonialism is continuing in that country. And Professor Bar-Eli also mentions talk about the comparison between communism and fascist regime, and in this point, I think North Korea is initially North Korea regime in Kim Il-sung era pursued the communist values such as Marxist, Leninist, and etc. But afterwards, since the 1960s, I think, in my opinion, Kim Il-sung more pursued the way of Juche, which means the nationalistic idea. And Juche means, I also mentioned that Juche was initially one of the kind of diplomatic strategy to be independent from Soviet Union and China as well, and then maybe from the United States, and now on, and Professor Balali also mentioned that socialist prosperity and civilization, the idea and the vision of the country is very kind of illusion. But I think maybe every country has its own blueprint, and maybe North Korea also can have the kind of idea landscapes and urbanscape of the country, and they can dream it as well, I think. But it could be it could be compared with it also reminds us of the Great Famine in the mid-90s, but maybe I think North Korean regime and its leader doesn't want to repeat that, the kind of disaster. And they are trying to be one of the normalization of the country now. And so, and my discussant also mentioned the human rights issues. And in that point, I wanna add my opinion. I think there are political persecutions and also mass killings are existing today, but I think the mobilization from the bottom is not only controlled by violence. And in my opinion and experiences with the in-depth interviews with North Korean refugees in South Korea, they agreed their regimes and they kind of, I could capture that those kinds of voluntary agreements from the bottom. So I can say that not all of them are resisting against their regime, and many of them are pro-regime and pro-government people when they were residing in North Korea. And you also mentioned that ethno-nationalism is always engaging in violent conflict and those kinds of ethno-nationalism never exist without enemy, and North Korea have reinforced us versus them mindsets, but these days I can say maybe we can set the starting point as the Pyeongchang Olympic Games in 2018. North Korea's criticism toward South Korea, both South Korea and United States, decreased dramatically, and their criticism was always toward the conservative parties in the South, not all of the South Koreans. And yeah, that's right. Their ethnic nationalism serves for their regime and their and this is their unique political distinctiveness and yeah. And lastly, and my discussant asked the collective identity is antagonistic towards surrounding countries in surrounding countries. Yeah, the collective identity of North Korea. Maybe I don't know. You are mentioning whether you are mentioning the regime or the people, but for now, I
refer to the regime, of course.
The regime, of course, yeah. If you mean the regime, yes, they are quite antagonistic towards their surrounding countries. But I'm neither historian nor political scientist, but I can say they are doing their best to survive in the world. I think because their surroundings have been always very their surroundings weakened the country and sanctioned the regime, and so I think, well, this is the story about the survivor story of the regime, but yeah, but that happened the way of survivor in this world. So maybe I hope, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. You don't have to answer everything now, because we have also other things to ask, and so that we can discuss. So I have a practical question about the university you are. It is very impressive that the university that you are is specialized only in North Korea. And my question is practical and methodological. Given that North Korea is an isolated place, difficult to get in touch with, difficult to know what's going on there. And what we know now, I saw that they have some accounts on Facebook that the regime shows that it is a very nice place to live and have a good life. How do you collect, not you only, but also all the faculties that you have in the university you are? How do you collect your information from North Korea? And especially, how do you get an insight which is not through the filter of the regime? This is one part of the question. The second part of the question is what Avi Bar-Eli asked also in his way, what is the vision of North Korea? And since North Korea and South Korea, I see many similarities, what is happening in the area of my expertise in Cyprus, northern part of Cyprus and Cyprus in the south. At least in Cyprus, the Republic of Cyprus and the administrative entity in the north, head and recognized by Turkey, they have a common ground to talk about. They have a parliament, they have elections, they have open market economy. On the contrary, we have Juche in the north, and in the south, it's a parliamentary democracy of the West, and another economy, other in the north, other in the south. Fortunately, I saw that you have agreed that you have the same bloodline, which is, I think it was so obvious that you should not agree upon that. It's a fact. But if the vision is the unification, then which model are they discussing about that the new Korea, the reunified Korea will have and will accept? This is a question so that it might answer also the thought that Professor Bar-Eli said about the vision. Juche wants to come to the south, or Western democracy wants to come to the north? Are they discussing about it or not? These are my two points that I would like from you to have an idea what's going on. If Paula, Professor Caballo wants to add her question just before she leaves, because she has to leave our meeting at 2 o'clock, 2:05. I give the floor also to her, and then to you, Dr. Choi in Seoul.
Thank you, Gavriel. Just a very quick question mark, and which in fact echoes the last part of your comment, Gavriel, and that's about the bloodline. I would like to hear more about the role of the bloodline as perhaps the common denominator, bloodline in the national, I would say, sentiment, or in the national consciousness, as some kind of a common denominator perhaps between the two Koreas, and to what extent this bloodline is also linked with a historical narrative. Is the bloodline also telling a story that both Koreas are still agree around, could still gather around? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, and I will answer the Professor Paula Gracia's question, and about the role of bloodline in the sentiment. We have of course we have a historical narrative here. For example, the Mountain Baekdu. I don't know whether you have heard of it. The Mountain Baekdu is understood as a background of the both Korea's mytho-historical derivation from a common ancestor called Dangun, and basically in every Korea and people in both South and North are educated these kinds of history, and but in the people level, the level of people, not everybody agree with this idea. We are the one blood. We have the one bloodline and identical bloodline, and as Gabriel mentioned as well, and for now, South Korea has the multicultural backgrounds. Many Korean Chinese are living here, and including Korean Americans and other marriage migrants are residing in the rural area as well. So when we look at the cultural backgrounds in both Koreas, South Korea is more like the multicultural basis, but many North Koreans says like they didn't see any foreigners in their country. So, and moreover, North Korean regime emphasized the maybe they don't agree with the globalization. I mean, they think the globalization is the threat of the world. So they are very kind of isolated. They are maintaining a kind of isolated attitude toward the other races and ethnic groups as well. And so about the bloodline, maybe many North Korean people are believing the North and the South are the identical blood relationships, but
okay, yes, yeah. It is about the blood so they have agreed that there is a blood route, a common blood route. What about the political unification? Are they discussing about it? Do they have a vision for a common and reunified South and North Korea, or it is just a subject that they are going to talk about it in the future, if in the future?
Maybe, yeah, we are studying many cases like Eastern and Western Germany, and Gabriel also mentioned Cyprus and Turkey cases here, but we don't have any unified and identical and sole vision of the one new Korea, and we don't have any dominant opinions about this. So I hope
so it is too early for that. Yeah. So it is too early for that. And,
sure.
And practically, how do you collect your information from the North? If you can summarize in a small time, because we do not have much time.
Yeah, we collect we read the raw materials. We collect the raw materials from our library, and they they buy those kinds of North Korean raw material from Korean Chinese especially.
So you get your material through China?
Yes.
And what about the insight? What about the inside facts? I mean, in internet, it's the intranet in North Korea. Internet you have in the South. You don't communicate with them?
Internet? We don't. Basically, it is illegal to communicate with North Koreans for South Korea, and basically the North Korean websites, all of the North Korean websites are blocked in the South Korea because of the national security law, and some Koreans like me connect to the website through alternative routings. We have our ways.
So you do have your ways to talk with the North. Okay.
But basically the Instagram and Facebook are open to South Koreans as well. So we can approach and access those kinds of information, but we cannot contact North Korean directly or indirectly. It's illegal in South Korea because of the security law.
Thank you. So now we continue with the second round. Nathan Aridan, you are on the floor, and then it's Omri Dinur, both fellows at the Azriélì Center for Israel Studies. Please, Nathan, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. It was fascinating, and many of the questions I wanted to ask have been asked and answered. But the question I always have is that sometimes the context before 1910 with a special agreement, what was the state in Korea? For instance, there's always been a discussion in the world about Tibet, whether ever Tibet was an independent country. And I think we often lack the context. And the idea of being isolationist was way before, just like China. China was forced open. Japan was forced open in 1854 by Commodore Perry. So Korea didn't have a choice. But the interesting thing I would like to ask is, were there differences between people in the North and the South in their various different points of view? And when it comes to communication, as we've talked about bloodline, etc., the interesting thing is the relations with Japan, relations with China, relations with Russia. To what extent has this played or will continue to play an influence? Thank you very much.
Sorry, the internet connection was not...
Excuse me. And Omri Dinur, so that we will complete the second round, and then you answer, okay?
Gabrielle, she's saying that she could not hear Natan's question well, so...
So...
Could Natan repeat his question?
I'll do it very, very quickly, Apresi. I was asked, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was asking about as Korea before 1910. Was it a unified country? We tend to automatically assume that it was, but that's something I was asking. And the influence of Russia, China, and Japan on Korea before the 1910 special constitution. Thank you.
And Omri Dinur?
Yes. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, following Professor Bar-Eli's comment, I would like to ask about the idea of North Korea as a socialist paradise, as you mentioned, in the sense that it described a positive ambition for creating a utopia, which is something that happens in all kinds of cases of new nations or building of new nations. But in fact, at the end, are mostly a nationalistic, totalitarian, fascist regime, which turn out to be dystopian. Now, my interest is about the question whether this has to do with the split between the North and the South, in the sense that the North, or the Kim, Il-sung ideology, is to create this kind of so-called utopia, whether in the South they had no interest in presenting an utopian ambition as a positive ideology, or any kind of central ideology to the state, to the new state, in any case. So that can be an explanation for the split between the North and the South.
Okay, so first we start with a question from our fellow Natan, and then we continue with the question that posed Omri. Yes, please.
Okay, before 1910, Korea was a unified country called Joseon Dynasty, but it was not a form of Western notion of nation state, but it was basically a unified country. And the second question was, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
I was
the influences of China, Russia, Japan, but you don't have to answer it. Okay.
Yeah. In my understandings, Korea has been attacked by Japanese many times, and from China as well.
Okay, and your answer to Omri Denur?
Omni Rodu, I couldn't get the second question from Omni Rodu, so sorry about that.
Please, yeah. Omri, can you tell it again by summarizing your question, your subject, please?
Yeah, I was asking about the idea of North Korea as an socialist paradise, like you presented, in the sense that it is kind of a positive utopia, trying to, be the main, like, central ideology of the new state. Whether this has to do with the split between the North and the South, in the sense that the North, Kim Il-sung, and so on, wanted to determine this ideology as the positive idea, okay, for the new state, and the South rejected it, or didn't even want to have any kind of central ideology for, the new state at all.
Yeah, I think the Kim Jong-un's or Kim Il-sung's utopia for their nation, for their state, was on the one hand, it is the propaganda for their people, because in the Kim Il-sung era, the economy was not that good, so they should represent the new vision of the country, so that people can be mobilized toward that goal of the nation. And in Kim Jong-un era, the utopian ambition was a little bit changed, because they are pursuing to be a kind of pursuing a normalization of the country, and at the same time they want to maintain their country as independent. So so now it looks like North Korea pursues to achieve a name or title of a state, reinforcing its patriotism. So normalization of the state in the Kim Jong-un is crucial and key factor to promote their ideology. Whereas South Korea, we don't have any, the kind of vision, but every regimes have those kinds of blueprints and visions of their country, but we don't agree with that kind of positive utopia, but we are observing how North Korea is moving on these days and changing on the world stage. Thank you.
Okay, and now we have a question from Facebook. Sava Stavro is an historian from Cyprus, and he asks how cultural diplomacy has been developed during the Kim Jong-un era. And I would add also if there is any change in this matter, in this subject, on how North Korea is presenting itself abroad during the previous era, vis-a-vis the era that we are having now. I would also like to tell to all the friends and the fellows that the next round will be the last of the questions. So if you have any other, please write down in the chat, and we are going to discuss your questions. So this is a question that comes from Facebook. about the cultural diplomacy of North Korea during
cultural diplomacy.
Kim Jong-un era.
Cultural diplomacy during Kim Jong-un era. Yeah, about diplomacy, I'm not the proper one to answer this question, but culturally, looking at the North Korean mediascapes today, the North Korean official media reveals more, they are attempting to engender more connectedness with the outside world, and they are representing themselves as a noble country, and North Korean official media reveals a kind of hybrid form of patriotism and nationalism, and which juxtaposes loyalty to the nation and loyalty to the state. And about the cultural diplomacy, maybe I think when I'm observing and seeing their Facebook pages and Instagram pages, I think this is kind of a public diplomacy as well as
yes.
Trump uses Twitter, and as other Western countries.
Yes, it is a part of it, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you see any difference between past or in the last 2 years?
Compared with the previous regime, Kim Jong-il regime, they are more open to the outside world now, and they are presenting and propagandizing their regime actively and positively.
And something last, if I can understand well, now that the Trump administration is at the end of its time, and we saw those meetings that they had in Vietnam, North Korea with the US and the President Trump in Vietnam during, I think it was last year. What is the legacy of President Trump now in North Korea after this kind of moves that they have done? And how do they look in North Korea? What's going to happen with the new president in 2021? If you have an idea of what's going on in the media, since it is your expertise, the media of North Korea.
When I look at the mediascapes in the North Korea, they are waiting for this traditional time, like how new president would be treat them, and how the policy would be changed. And one thing I can add here about the legacy of Trump, before the summit meetings in 2018 and 2019, that Trump was demonized as a warmonger in the North Korean media, but afterwards the criticism has been decreased dramatically, and they don't mention that much of criticism toward both South Korea and United States today.
So at the end of the day, Trump administration was considered as friendly or less hostile in North Korea, if I understand well.
These days they don't mention much about Trump or United States now.
So it is a silence. So silence is good instead of non-silent of the past.
Maybe they are waiting,
Maybe they're waiting.
Observing what is happening and what is going on there.
Okay, so if I can understand well, all the questions are answered, and the meeting has concluded. It was, I hope you had a good time. Thank you very much, Dr. Choi from Seoul, that you have been with us for some 1 hour and a half. And thank you all for being with us. Thank you to everybody who viewed us on Facebook.